Rid. How's it going?
It is going quite well. Thanks for having me on. This will be fun.
It's my pleasure. Do you live in Kalamazoo, Michigan? Did I see that somewhere?
Yes, I do.
How does one of the people who runs one of the most popular like tech design education things end up in Kalamazoo?
I always make the joke that I'm the token Midwesterner because I pretty much have exclusively worked with teams in like New York or San Francisco the last, I don't even know, 9 years. I actually was in Denver. I spent quite a bit of time there after graduating. I don't know, man. COVID happened and like my brother lived in Kalamazoo because he took a job and he had the first kid, which attracted my parents. And then I'm like sitting there with my wife and we're like in lockdown isolation or renting a 700-foot square like apartment in Denver. And we're kind of just like, what if we just like looked at Zillow laughing at the idea? And then it's like, it turns out you can buy a lot of house in Michigan. We're like, should we just do it? So we literally just bought a house remotely without having ever been to the city, not really knowing how long we were going to be here. It was just going to be a fun thing. But it turns out it's pretty great. Like I like Michigan and I love where I live. And I think I'm going to live here for a while now.
That's awesome. I love that. Some interesting parts of that ring similar. We had beginning of COVID, 500 square feet, 2 cats, 2 people and a baby. And that just wasn't going to work.
You had the baby. That's the variable that I can't. Like I have an 8-month-old now. I can't even imagine doing that. Though.
It was super not fun. We ended up moving to a farm town, which I believe it. Because we were pretty concerned, like this whole virus thing. What's it going to do to an infant? So we're like, let's de-risk this situation and move as far away as we can. But anyway, so how long have you been doing design stuff for? Because for folks who don't know, Rid, you run one of the more popular sort of like design training things. I think you have a newsletter. You also have this thing called Figma Academy, which you've been running for a while. So there's a bunch of different like design education related things. So how long have you been doing this stuff for?
I've been doing design education for about 5 years. I was working in education before that. And actually like the last 5 years, all I've done is education. So I've like helped out with my friend Matt's course, Shift Nudge, which kind of like taught me the ropes. And then I worked on my own course, Figma Academy. And that was basically like my beginning of COVID project. Like that's all I did was like build this and figure it out. And the more that I worked on Figma Academy, the more that I was starting to see opportunities at more of like an infrastructural layer for online learning. And so that's what led me to join Maven.com. And so I was the first designer, one of the early employees there, and kind of like built those 2 products in tandem, solving all of my own problems with like the engineers at Maven essentially. And so I've been designing products for like, I don't know, about like 14 years, but I kind of started more as like a designer who was using, or a founder who was using design as a skill set. Like I wouldn't have really identified as a designer until I'd probably been doing it for like 7 or so years. But then really got into education and kind of just became obsessed with just learning experiences, like how you can create really amazing learning experiences for designers and really anyone in a professional setting. And that's been pretty much my exclusive focus for the last like 5 years.
It's pretty complex, like designing learning journeys for people. I was just talking with somebody about this, and I was saying that one of the really gnarly parts of doing this is, unlike in almost any other product, when it comes to designing learning experiences, generally speaking, your successful customers churn. Which is kind of like not great structurally. Given that, you still went ahead and started working on like some of these projects. Like you talk about Figma Academy, for example, obviously it seems like the way we design things has changed dramatically because of Figma, right? This idea of collaborative design. What are some of the things that you noticed that kind of led to you putting this thing together essentially?
It's funny. I was working at an agency somewhere in like 2018, and I was the reason that we didn't switch to Figma from Sketch, because I was using like this plugin Anima to basically hack auto layout in Sketch. And I was like, I can't give this up. And finally I caved. And actually, after working on like a little freelance project, and I saw how these other 2 designers were using Figma, and I was like, oh man, that makes sense. Like design should be collaborative. And so we made this switch, and as the kind of senior designer at this agency, I was working with one of the younger designers and just showing her all the little intricacies of Figma and how to build these layouts. And it was actually that experience that kind of tweaked something in me where I was like, okay, this is actually really life-giving to mentor someone and see them grow and like impart what I know to someone else, And so I kind of just became obsessed with this idea of like, how can you do that at scale? Like, what would it look like? I had no answers. I didn't even know what I was going to teach. I just knew that woke something up in me a little bit. And the more that I got into Figma, the more interesting it became. And you said the key word, like collaborative. Like that's what really changed. And like for the longest time, it was so easy to say, well, the tools don't matter. And it's like, well, yeah, they didn't. But once everyone's using the same tool, they actually kind of do matter a little bit. And the way that you build, the way that you set up a team, the way that you even think about something like library structures and how the components work and how we build layouts as a team, like there's a real opportunity to learn as like an individual, take what you know back to the team and make everyone else better. And that unlock really only happened once we made the shift to browser-based design with Figma. And like the more that I kept pushing in on that, just the more interesting things that I found and the more little interesting tactics that I would uncover.
More like more parts of the frontier to explore.
And that's what it felt like. Like in 2019, 2020, that's literally what it felt like. Like Figma was not just a thing I did for my job. It was like all of my hobbies wrapped in one. Like I would just open it up on a Saturday, like, okay, like how can I build this thing? And then I would just try things and explore. And I'm like, oh, what if I could like use a slot component in this way? And I was just so interested. And again, like it was COVID. So it was like, there wasn't
what
like
else
a million
you
things
do,
to
right?
do. It was like, it was Figma or Netflix. And so I just kept making things like every single day. And the more that I made, the more that I learned. And I would just tweet it out, figure out what was interesting to other people and double down and keep doing it over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's funny. It makes me kind of reflect like, how much of what product management is today is defined by like Atlassian with Jira, and how much of these other functions are kind of defined by tooling that became dominant in some way. And you think the practice is what it is today, but maybe that's very much an artifact of the tools available to you, right?
I totally believe this. I think as an industry, we are seeing the effects of Figma and maybe we're not even aware of it. Because like I think Figma has become more technical. It's starting to mirror more to front end. We're starting to like build more around auto layout. They're catering to like enterprise customers more even. And like the people that will pay the most are the ones that are most interested in like design system tooling, Code Connect, these things. And it's like, the more that the platform has grown, the more that my role as an educator has started to be helping people figure out what actually matters and what you can kind of ignore. Because I think it's really easy to just automatically adopt every single new thing that they release. And you're actually like working backwards from like really enterprise workflows that might not even be applicable to you anymore. And so it's like, there's a million ways to do things in Figma, which is why it's not really about like how to use all the features anymore. It's like that second level of strategy. Like what actually makes sense for my team and why should I approach it this way?
Mm-hmm. It reminds me a little bit of like some of the stuff that's going on with like all this new AI tooling right now. It's just an overwhelming amount of things being released and worked on, developed. How do you kind of navigate what you think is worth paying attention to for designers, wherever they happen to be?
I guess the answer is kind of twofold because on one hand, I really do believe that there's like significant alpha in being an early adopter. And like by nature, I'm someone who is just like curious. I like going on product hunt. I like playing with new tools. I like trying things. And that has always helped me throughout my career. I do think it's a little bit more difficult nowadays than it's ever been because it does feel like we're just swimming through this onslaught of new tools. And I'll be honest, I don't think design tooling is there yet. I think Figma
what's missing? Like, what are the big pieces that we just don't have yet? As an outsider, it looks like you guys like there's so much tooling in the design space, but obviously, I'm not as engaged in the craft, say you would be, obviously. So how do you think about, what are the pieces that don't exist yet?
It depends on like what angle you are attacking. Because like if you think about like the role of a designer, I mean, there are like 100 jobs to be done. So like, yeah, sure, there are ways that AI can help you a lot. And there are little isolated features that Figma has added to make our lives a little bit easier, populating content, visual search. Those are all great. What AI will do in the future that I think everyone is so excited about is it's just going to like significantly drive down the cost and time investment associated with creating software. And to me, that is like getting ideas onto the canvas, creating like full sets of designs using AI. And that is not there right now. There are interesting products. Figma has their own. That was all the drama around like Make Designs where they pulled it back and re-released it. Galileo
Why
is
do you
another
think
one
there
that's
was so much
interesting.
drama around that in particular? Like, I don't understand. It felt like something so horrible had happened when I was reading all the Twitter, tweets about everything. And, it didn't make sense to me. Maybe you can enlighten me on the
I
psyche of
actually
the designer.
do. Yeah, I know. I know exactly why it happened actually, because when it was released, I immediately interviewed Jordan Singer, who was leading AI at Figma at the time. And I understood exactly like how it worked because I talked to the engineers that were working on it. And the big disconnect, honestly, at the end of the day, I think I think Figma dropped the ball from a PR and positioning standpoint. There was a little tiny footnote made in the actual live unveiling, but it was so easy to gloss over, and it wasn't anywhere on Twitter, which is really like that's the only place that actually matters right now. And so they weren't actually generating designs with that feature. They had hand built with humans a basic design system that gave the AI a bunch of building blocks. And so when you said, I want a dog walking app, it was simply assembling a UI from this preset bucket of components that the Figma team had made. And that's why there wasn't a lot of variance in these outputs. And some of them looked, a lot like some of the Apple products, but that was just because the design system that was built as like the underlying foundation for the feature was like drawing inspiration from there. And so they called it Make Designs when in reality, it was more like assemble a somewhat generic looking UI based off of the preset components that we built for you. And that separation was not clearly communicated. And so people had a lot of questions. And I think if they would have done a better job of setting expectations, actually, we could have avoided all of this in the beginning because like the feature, it makes sense as like a foundational level. I don't know if you watch the Dune movies, for instance. Like I love the Dune movies. They're pretty fun. Dune 2 was awesome. Dune 1 was super average, mainly because it was just like this very wide foundational, we're creating the universe, we're setting all the pieces in place to be able to build on in the future. That was Figma's AI release. It was incredibly bland, but it needed to happen. And if they would have just called it what it is, I think we could have avoided all of this. Now, they'll do interesting things in the future, but it has to start like pulling from your design system and getting a little bit more creative. And that I have not seen any tool handle well. And the reality is that design is harder than code because code knows exactly where to place something. You have a cursor like in the code editor, and it takes all the context of what you're working on, you give it some natural language, and it puts something right in the place where that cursor is. Figma has that same generative angle where they have to know what you want based off of the language that you give it, but they also have to understand where to place things. There's so many different ways to assemble a design on a spatial canvas where it adds that layer of complexity. And so all of the design, like generative AI tools right now, they're just not geared towards professional designers. And it's kind of annoying sometimes that a lot of the positioning is toward professional designers because the reality is it's like they're worthless. Like I would never use these tools as someone who actually is capable. It's fantastic for a founder. Like if you're listening to this and you're not a designer and you just like have some savvy, but you have an idea in your head, oh, that's perfect for you. Like it's going to look a little bit generic, but like, let's be real. So is anything else that you're going to create because it's like, you're not, 10 years into this profession. For professional designers, though, everything out there is basically just a toy and it's interesting to play with, but I'm kind of just waiting for like, what is the breakthrough use case that's going to get people to adopt this stuff?
Yeah, I wonder, speaking of this, I wonder what you think of this. Something I've been thinking a lot about in terms of, obviously AI is, everybody's talking about AI this, AI that, and obviously it's changing a lot of work. I mean, I think if you think about the areas where AI has the most adoption and the most value, I think it mostly has to do with, business related processes and things, or even school, right? So summarizing things, writing things, whatever, that are understood. One of the things that really stands out to me is it feels like the value, if you're able to do the process stuff faster, then the value in making things will be differentiated based on things like taste, I would say. And I would think design plays more of an important role in these products. Like if anybody can create a widget that orders pizza, right, then the widget that orders pizza with the best experience is going to be the one that probably gets the greatest adoption and achieves the greatest success. Does that, somebody who's played around with this stuff a lot, does that resonate with you as like a frame for how to think about what's going to change in the building of new stuff, new products, whatever it happens to be?
Yeah, I think there's kind of like two ways to look at it. One is totally taste, and I agree. I think in many ways, in theory, the bar would rise as like the cost of software approaches zero. You have more entrants. So like something has to be a differentiating factor. And I think taste can be that. An investment I'm making into that world right now is like, I really, really diligently save designs that I like just like different visual patterns or maybe even a piece of copy, because I'm pretty confident that in the future, we're not just going to be like feeding these models natural language, but you'll be able to feed them screenshots and different types of inputs to be able to create really interesting things that don't feel as generic. So like that is one bucket. I also think the reality is too that, man, just like distribution is such a massive variable. Like when I actually think about like, how do I best position myself as in the future as someone who does have a portfolio of projects that are like, I mean, I think they're kind of interesting, but they're copyable, like I'm working on a company behind the scenes right now. It's going to inherently be copyable. Like I'll have decent taste, but like somebody else will be able to rip it off. So how do you win? Well, I think it's more about like brand and distribution at that point.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And, it parlays on similar thing, which is in an era where AI can make lots of content, right? Again, and content is helpful from a distribution point of view, right? It's taste and somehow quality and whatnot. So even though the tools for making stuff are more democratized across people with like wider levels of experience doing these things, those that are able to better understand what people want and give them that, that better experience might have more of an advantage than ever.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also like Scott Belsky has this interesting parallel where he talks about how like the creator economy was kind of like the dominant buzzword and shaped a way that, especially like you'd mentioned like content, like that was such a driving force behind, what has been a pretty interesting societal shift. He talked about how that's going to be slightly old world and we're going to move into this more of like a meaning economy, which I've been thinking about that a lot recently, where it's like, yeah, you have to have quality, but also like how can you build or help people attach some kind of emotional connection to the thing that you are making? Is there a way, like Arc browser is maybe an example of what it looks to do this? Like, yeah, they have really good taste. Like the product's really cool. Like I love using it, but they've done really interesting things to help people create this like affinity with their product. And like they're like almost show a level of like vulnerability and like really, really go above and beyond to talk about how they are like meeting this very specific narrative coming from a user and like solving this problem. And like just the way that they talk about everything that they do, I think is going to be a playbook that a lot of companies are going to copy in the coming years.
Yeah, they've done a really good job. I think that their official company is called the Browser Company of New York, right? Is that? Yep. And I've seen the logo thing and it's like, I don't know, it gives you a sense of nostalgia for,
Yeah.
those scenes, movies from the 1900s where, it's like Johnson Bros, Cannon Company, or whatever it happens to be, where it's, it reminds you of a time where we were just making stuff and quality stuff, and it was down the street that they made it for you. It's just like a really interesting, coming back to your point around taste and whatnot, to make that kind of connection, I guess.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that they are creating a like future MBA playbook in real time.
It's funny. Let's tag into that a little bit, because I know a lot of people have opinions about MBAs, and especially somebody who's making, all sorts of educational content. I am concerned for colleges and universities' ability to respond to the changing arena of employment, to say the least. I am concerned that the model is really breaking down. And I think there's kind of two angles to it. One of them is just a rate of change problem that I feel like they're probably not very well equipped to understand, when most of your people that are teaching are not active in industry and haven't been for many, many years. Like, even if you go to design school, like any college that teaches design or whatever, like how many of them are really digging into like collaborative design as part of the foundation of how to be a designer? I don't think that many, at least not last when I checked. And I think the second thing has to do with obviously some of this new AI stuff, where there's an amount of expertise that is now like real expertise that's now like essentially free, right? And so if you were going to go to a college or university and learn, I don't know, how to make like a revenue forecast, right? ChatGPT can probably spit out a half decent spreadsheet with instructions on how to use it, and can walk you through how to think about it and whatever, probably pretty well. And so there's this question of like, what is, if it's no longer about teaching expertise, and these institutions are not able to keep fast enough with the change, like what is changing about education, like as a sector, where it's folks like you and others who are seeing a lot of adoption and a lot of enthusiasm, whereas some of these incredibly expensive, institutions are probably not going to necessarily be long for this world. Maybe that's too dramatic. Like,
no,
maybe they'll figure it out. But
I'm laughing because I have too many thoughts on this, and I'm like, I need to find the right level of rant, because I totally agree. And even just
I think you gotta let loose, man, because you're speaking to a friend here for sure on this topic.
Okay, so I have an economics degree from a liberal arts school, DePaul University in the Midwest. I paid like $53,000 a year, something ridiculous for this. That style of education, I think, basically needs to die. It's not helpful. And I think you hit on a lot of the reasons why. It's impossible to expect a giant institution to keep up with this rate of change, at least for specific sectors, right? Like if we're talking about anything related to like tech and design, by all means, like don't go get a design degree. Don't go get a computer science degree. Like I think it's a giant waste of money. Now, there will be different types of industries and career paths where credentialing is going to be almost impossible to chip away at in the short run specifically. That is what it is. Like the Ivy League is going to keep cranking people out and putting them on a pathway to success for the foreseeable future. It's that more like middle ground, like specifically like the type of university that I went to, where it's just like, what are we doing here? It doesn't make any sense. And you mentioned like the ChatGPT, for sure. Like you can get like a little bit of a taste, but like how many years away are we from literally everyone on the planet having like a personalized tutor that not only has access to like all of the world's knowledge, but deeply understands you, what you need, and how you like to learn? That is crazy. Like that's going to really, really shake things up. It's like, I have an 8-month-old daughter. I think about what the heck is her education journey going to be like? I mean, mind-blowing, right? Like she will learn from a personalized tutor that understands everything about her. How could it possibly be that a traditional 4-year degree would be the right decision for her? 18 years from now. That's almost impossible for me to imagine a world where that exists. Like I can't imagine pushing someone down that route unless you were going for a highly credentialed vertical, like you want to be a doctor or something like that.
Especially when you consider not just the money cost. I think we always fixate on the money cost, right? The time cost. Yeah. This is something that I think a lot about, because I did a 4-year degree at the University of Toronto in human biology and cell and systems biology, I think it was. Whatever. So obviously I'm putting that to good use every day.
The natural progression.
And for me, my experience, I think at least in that program, it was a very challenging program. So I learned a lot around how to work smart, how to work hard, whatever. Maybe not the work hard part. I take that. How to work smart, let's just say. But that was 4 years. And I walked out of that. And I remember, like, in my last year, being very concerned because I had no idea what was going to come next. And I could see, like, okay, 11 months, 10 months, 9 months, I'm out of this. And there's no next step here. You know what I mean? And I ended up hustling my way into a job that ended up setting me on this path towards becoming a user researcher. But that first year of essentially interning and helping out with this company that ended up hiring me was an entire year of learning how to be productive and how to do things. And, I reflect back on that a lot and I say, how come I never learned how to do things in my 4-year degree? Yeah. How come I came in there and I remember very well, there's a point where, I was asked to do some outreach around this and that. And, the founder pulled me aside and he's like, you need to learn how to write emails. And I'm like, I functionally know how to write an email, that part, but clearly I'm communicating like a buffoon and it's making me look bad. How did this, man, I just spent so much money.
You have to actually unlearn the thing.
Yeah.
I took a lot of writing classes in college. I was good at them. I had to unlearn it all.
Yeah. Now I write emails. They're 3 sentences, no punctuation. Before I was writing letters that were so long and had so much in them and whatnot. And he's like, that's not how people communicate.
Alec.
Yeah. Sincerely best regards of sincerity. And when we think ahead, okay, you've doing all these educational programs right now. If you contrast at a philosophical level, what is fundamentally different between the latest, whether it's courses or podcasts or whatever it is that you've put out from Dive, which everybody should check out, dive.club. Check them out. Some really great design content on there and design courses. You contrast that with the experience you had at a 4-year degree. What are some of the fundamental differences that make this side work and the other side is falling away?
Yeah. I think you hit on one element, which is the fact that I'm still a practitioner. I'm doing this stuff every single day. And I would be wary of learning from people who are not actively in the trenches just because things are changing too quickly. And so that is the very first step. And even the way that we've structured things at Maven, same thing. The whole shift has been actually, we need to find practitioners who are doing the thing that they are teaching as a day job, and they just do this on the side. That's who you should learn from. And I think that gets more at almost an apprenticeship model a little bit. So that's one thing. The second is, I mean, I don't know about you, but college for me was all just tests, right? It's just tests, and you just intake a bunch of knowledge and you cram it all in, and then you just regurgitate it back out onto a doc and hope for the best. And that just doesn't map to the way that the world works at all, at all. And so fundamentally structuring things around building and making the thing and really, really hands-on work. You should do the work that you are trying to get a job for, not learn about it, not read about it, not work on your fill in the blank flashcards and flipping through Quizlet decks to make sure that you really, really know this stuff. That's just worthless. You got to actually do the work, and then having some level of accountability too. Cause I think the pendulum swinging away from traditional college first was like Udemy and Skillshare courses. And like, that was fine. You might be learning from a practitioner, but how many of us were doing that in isolation, and how many of us actually finished that program or did anything practical associated with it? Very low. It's like actually like 5 or 6%, which is not good either.
I think it was even less. I remember reading Udemy's S1 or whatever their filing was. And one of the risk sections was like, we have a 2% completion rate on the courses. And
I think it was 2%. Yeah. I was going to overestimate. So that's obviously that's not working, right? So it's not just about who you're learning from. So it's like, there's like some element of community and accountability. And so that's why I'm like really bullish on, cohort-based courses, or whatever you would want to refer to them as, where like the way that I've kind of evolved and structured Figma Academy is now it's 4 weeks. You were going through it with a group of like 50 people who are all every week shipping and making a thing and putting it out in public, asking for feedback. You can look at other people's work. There's opportunities to actually like join a live session and ask questions and hold each other accountable and like really go deeper. And I think it's really hard to preserve that level of learning momentum on your own. So that's the other piece where it's like, that part of college is helpful, right? Like, can we pull that out, but then just rethink kind of who we are learning from and the medium in which we are consuming that content.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. We built a product. We recently took it down. We're going to work on something slightly different now. But one of the main learnings from it, so essentially it was this Q&A video app where people in the research community could submit questions. And then we had about 100 or so kind of like senior research folks, whether they're senior ICs or directors or whatever happens to be, who would record video responses to them. And it was a really effortless kind of like, I don't know, let me not get too far away. Maybe not effortless creation experience, but it was a simple and quick creation experience for folks, and it wasn't too demanding on them. And then on the consumption side, you could just open it up and kind of check it out. And there were definitely some people that we saw that were just consistently using this, like every day, kind of thing like that. But one of the things that was interesting reflecting on it was the lack of connection to other people who were going through that experience and trying to pick these things up as well. I think, I mean, obviously you can look at it from like a retention point of view, but more like I would even care more about it from like a motivation point of view and an inspiration point of view, right? You're not the only one that's going through this. You're not the only one that's trying to pick these things up. We are very much social creatures. And this idea of learning on your own, I think it's ahistorical too, because as we were, again, reflecting on this experience, you go back in history and like, how did people learn, right? They would be sitting at if they're trying to become a blacksmith, you'd be working with a master blacksmith for years and years, right? Or you wanted to become, a shoemaker, you would do the same thing. And so you were just with other people talking about things, getting feedback. And I see, and I hope that that's clear part of the next generation of learning products. And so, obviously it's great to see that you've already well picked up on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's becoming more popular, which is encouraging. And there is something special about taking learning and like giving that social element, but also you're able to learn with specialists all over the world, like removing that proximity barrier. Like I'm excited about it. I do think it introduces other challenges. And like, I spent a lot of time thinking about the future of education, just like, one, I love it. And two, I just had a kid. So I'm like,
now you're invested. Now you got to know.
I'm really invested. I'm thinking about like, man, like the last thing I want to do is entrust her education journey to an institution and that's tasked with like, hey, keep up with AI,
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to do that. But also there is like that social element too. And so like, the fact is like, it's all changing and we're staring like the next order of magnitude jump in the face too. And so I think adaptability is really the only thing that matters at the end of the day, because it's just changing too fast.
Yeah. So broad strokes to two things, to designers that are out there, what's the number one thing they should be doing from your point of view to prepare themselves for the years ahead and the changes that are coming?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's one baseline that is a requirement that I'll just touch on really quickly because nothing else matters if you don't have it. If you want to design products, you have to have a baseline of craft and visual skills. Like, I think that is going to become even more important, even in an AI world, because it's going to be very difficult to differentiate and even just to be able to know what is good unless you have those like fundamentals instilled in you. So assuming you have that baseline, the way that I'm kind of thinking about it now is I would lean into one complementary skill and use that as a way to position myself, especially if I'm like looking for that next role. And it can kind of be anything. Like, the fact is, AI is going to change the way that we think about software creation. Teams are going to get more lean. Lines are going to get blurred. We're not going to have this traditional product design engineering trio. Like, that footstool is going away. And so if you just stay really comfortably in your design box and it's like, no, this is my responsibilities box, I think you're going to have a bad time in the future. And so you almost have to kind of pick a direction. Like, which direction do you want to expand? If you like the idea of building and maybe are slightly more technically minded, oh my gosh, there's just never been a better time to be a builder. Like, I was talking to this guy, Meng Tu, a couple days ago, who just built an entire AI-powered video editing app, solved all of his own problems, took him 3 months. Not a traditional like developer. And it's like, design as a core skill set, when in theory software building becomes democratized, is the best core skill set. Like, I 100% believe that. And so like, I'm almost like on a personal mission to help more designers be comfortable being builders. I don't think it necessarily has to be that, though. There are other things that you could pair it with, like really investing into storytelling and like product sense, product strategy. I think that is another area where you can maybe start to like creep into like what would traditionally be more of like a PM-y role kind of thing. Or maybe it's like, actually you want to creep a little bit more into brand and get really good at like Midjourney and some of these new video generation tools. Like, great. It doesn't really matter. I think you kind of just have to ask yourself, like, what are you interested in? But if I was bringing a set of skills to the table in the future, I would be a little bit nervous about just having the like expected box of responsibilities of what we think of as a designer today. And I'd be really trying to figure out, how can I pair that set of skills with one other thing to create a narrative about myself that stands out.
I love that. If the footstool is gone, that means you have to become a bicycle or something like that.
I think maybe.
You gotta
like
just,
it. We'll call it that.
We'll call it. You heard it here first. And then one final thing. What's one thing somebody who's not a designer can do to brighten a designer's day and really make their job a lot better?
Is this in the context of like working on a team, or is
the context of working on a team? They work with designers, whoever this is.
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to mind, honestly, is just like contributing on the QA front. Like, I am always so pleased when someone comes to me and they're just like, hey, I like this, there's like this little edge case right here that's not really working as it should, or maybe this like hover state is jumping, or this piece of copy could be a little bit more clear. Like, as a designer, especially in like a smaller team environment, you bear a lot of responsibility for what is in production and making sure that it's like up to par. But it's like pretty hard actually to keep track of that, especially when there's like inevitably always this loss in translation element of like, okay, now it's like high fidelity in design, but now we have to build it high fidelity in code. And like, having more eyes that are really, I mean, I'm not talking about like just like glancing over things, but like really, really looking at like edge cases and ensuring that that jump to actual production code is all inclusive of everything that I am intending as a designer. That's a big job, and anytime anyone wants to help, it really goes a long way.
10 out of 10. You heard it here first, everybody. Get on that QA game. Rid, thank you so much for joining today. Hopefully we can continue the conversation. I love talking about learning and education and all that stuff. So much is changing so quickly. Folks, if you haven't checked out dive.club, you're definitely going to want to do that, especially if you're a designer looking to up your game in one of the many areas where you can up your game. Rid, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. This was fun. Definitely a nice combination of a lot of my favorite topics. So I enjoyed myself.
Well,
Thanks for having me.
Sounds like we'll have to do it again soon. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.